Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a curious and deep-thinking 20-year-old son, Joey, who is struggling to launch into adulthood. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. I'm also a certified coach helping primarily adoptive parents. Joey and I are committed to helping anyone impacted by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. So listeners, have you ever known an adoptee, maybe it's you or someone you love, who struggles with feeling disconnected and not belonging? I've definitely seen it in my son, and I've talked about it with lots of adult adoptees I know. We're going to be talking about that coping mechanism of dissociation with Tammy Murphy in this episode. She's a Black, same-race, domestic adoptee living in Indiana, and she's going to share her struggles with social anxiety and dissociation and how her adoption might be at the root of those feelings so she can help other adoptees and their friends and families who support them. So thanks for being open to sharing your story with our listeners on Unraveling Adoption, Tammy. I'm glad you're here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I heard you on Jennifer's podcast, Once Upon a Time in Adoptee Land, and I really appreciated your story there, and I'm glad we connected. So let's start by having you share, your origin story, whichever parts of it you'd like us to know.
I identify as an adoptee. I found out when I was like 7 or 8. One of my friends had told me we were playing with a ball outside, so she had told me, like, you're adopted. And so then I asked my mother, was I adopted? And she was like, no. And then, like, on the weekend when she was drinking, I would ask her, was I adopted? And she would be like, yes. And then she's sober on Sunday, she would say no. So there was that confusing for a few years. And by 12, that when I gotten a little older, I began to think within myself, did she have me as cesarean or, vaginally? And she couldn't tell me that, how long she was in labor. She couldn't answer those questions. Then I kind of just put it together that I was adopted because some things just didn't add up. Like my friends' mothers were 10 years younger than my mother, but we were the same age. So.
Yeah. So you're like, this doesn't feel like the rest of the kids and something's missing, but my mom keeps changing the story. That must have been really confusing.
Yes.
How old were you when you were adopted? Were you an infant?
Yes, so baby, I heard 2 months. She would tell me 2 months, but when I got my original birth certificate, it said a month and a half.
Okay.
When they adopted me. So
that's really early. So you asked your mom straight up, am I adopted? And if she was drinking, she would say yes. And then she would sober up and she said, no. As a 9, 10, 11-year-old, that must have just been super confusing. How did you manage those feelings? Did you kind of stuff it down or did you dwell on it?
I kind of just kept it in, but just always questioned her about it. And then she was like, my father, he didn't want to talk about it. And then I'm just gonna be honest, I took to drinking a little bit to deal with it that age.
Even that young. Wow. That is understandable. I mean, I can't imagine how disorienting that must have been. And it sounds like there must have been alcohol in the home. Yeah. So that was available. And you were like, okay, well, my mom does this and maybe it will help me. And I'm sure it helped to an extent, right? At the beginning.
A little bit.
Numbing you out or kind of getting your mind off of it. Oh, gosh. Did you struggle with addiction or was it just you dabbled in it as a kid and let it go?
Kind of marijuana. I use that to self-medicate. I kind of was exposed to that too, outside the house.
Sure.
It kind of made me feel better temporarily, but not a lot. Because sometimes when you're under the influence of those things, you'll think about it that much more. So it doesn't really help. Yeah.
My son struggles with cannabis use. And nowadays, oh man, the cannabis is so much stronger. The THC levels are much stronger than they used to be. And it doesn't even really work for him anymore. It's kind of lost its effect. But certainly at the beginning, it did its job to numb out. And I never blame any adoptee or person that is struggling that grabs a substance like that to self-medicate. That is completely understandable, especially if your parents aren't clued in or telling you the truth. That just must have been so hard. Did you have anyone else you could talk to? Did you know anyone else that was adopted or any other grownups in your life at that time?
I met a girl that was biracial when I was 22, 23. She had moved across the street from my parents. So she lived there, I think, a couple of weeks where we just kind of spoke. And then she said, come over. So it's kind of hard for me to bond or connect with people in the beginning.
Yeah.
It took a minute before I went over there, and then she had said she was adopted, her and her brother, and they were adopted by white parents. So she was mixed, biracial, and her brother was black. And he committed suicide at 16 in the parents' basement, to deal with that. So I think she has found it hard to deal with, so I could bond with her. Because other than that, I felt like I was the only person adopted, because all my friends, they wasn't adopted, and I'm sure it was others in school, but I just felt like I was the only person, I guess, in the world who was adopted, at least that I knew.
Yeah, I know it's so few percentage of people that are adopted. It's hard. I'm sure it makes you feel like you're all alone. For listeners, adoptees are 4 times likelier to attempt suicide. It's probably even more, but that's what they report. So it's a real big issue. And that's so tragic. I'm so sorry to hear about that with your friend. And tell me about, you said it's really hard for you to start a relationship or to become friends with people. That initial, is it social anxiety that keeps you from connecting? Can you talk about what that's like?
I'm naturally kind of shy and quiet, and I always felt like my life was fake. So it's hard just to get to know people. And then, like, my birth name is Diane Lawrence. They changed it to Tammy Murphy. So then as I started to get older, when I started working, I began to feel fake. And then it actually started like at 12. So I began to not want to play with my friends because I felt like I wasn't Tammy anymore. And I didn't know who I was. So it was weird to be around them. So it just kind of maintained friendships that got established in elementary school when I was younger.
Okay.
In my high school, like we went to school together, but I might not hang out with you after school.
Okay.
And then like at work, I might not hang out with you going to the bar or club or something with coworkers and stuff, but I can talk to you, interact with you at work.
Okay. So, you weren't like isolated at school or work, but you were limited with your outings and relationships outside of school and work. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Kind of blocked. You said that you felt fake because of your name. And it's very understandable at, when you were 11, 12, that adolescents, their whole job is to discover their identity. So you have a feeling of being fake. Is that mainly because of your name or because the lies about your adoption or just being adopted makes you feel fake?
Just being adopted, because I started looking up like a sense of identity a couple of weeks ago, and one of the examples was like you could lose your role as a daughter. So then I felt like, as far as being Wesley and Christine's daughters, that's my parents' name, I lost that role when I was, I guess, someone else's daughter. Yeah.
So you're like living a life that is not the one you were meant to live. You were taken away from that. Do you know the story of why they relinquished you, or?
Oh, I met the birth mother in 98, and she said he was abusive to her and then the daughters. So I guess she wanted me to have a better life. And she had 2 sons that died in a house fire. In 66, then the father blamed her for that. So I think maybe she felt it was hard to raise another child at that time. So she said she thought, I would be better off someone else. But the things that she wanted to save me from, I still went through. There was abuse in that home where I grew up. So I felt like, you probably should have kept me. But I realized it was her choice.
Oh, so you had a different life, but it wasn't necessarily better. You still struggled with abuse. I'm so sorry to hear that. And it makes me sad that, and I know it still happens today, that a mom in that situation, there's not the social supports for someone that's struggling with domestic violence or abuse or poverty or whatever. It's like, come on, we need to come around those moms so they can keep their children and keep themselves and the children safe. I mean, do you sometimes daydream about what it would have been like to stay with her?
No, because then I met one of the sisters, talked to her on Facebook a couple of years ago, and she felt she wasn't a good mother and that maybe I would have been better off living somewhere else. And she sent one of the older sisters to live with the grandmother who lives here. Wow. And she was younger. And then she said the mother didn't live with her mother. She got sent to live with her grandmother. So maybe, that was a part of her life to her. She could just do that because she didn't live with her mother.
Oh,
I kind of thought about.
So your birth mother got sent to her grandmother's. Is that what you're saying? So it's kind of a generational, repeating the cycle. Wow.
Yeah.
Oof. So, gosh, I can understand cognitively how it would be very difficult for you to feel like you belong or that you, to reach out beyond yourself because your identity is so confusing and not very stable. And I can see how that could affect just everything, all your relationships. Have you been able to connect closely with friends or spouse or partners?
I have one friend who lives in Dayton, so we're still pretty close, and I have other friends I talk to. But as far as relationships, I avoid, I guess, romantic, emotional relationships just to not get hurt.
Yeah.
And something I have an issue with trust as far as believing that I'm good enough or that's how he feels. And I have a hard time believing in love, that love just really exists, that you can love somebody. Then I feel like I have a hard time loving men and stuff. So I wouldn't want them to get hurt if they ever felt like I didn't love them.
Yeah. So you just stay inside yourself. That's understandable. And it's hard to hear, and my heart goes out to you, and I totally get it, why you feel you need to do that. It sounds like you're very aware of your dissociation, your difficulty creating and maintaining relationships. It sounds like you're really aware of it. What have you done to try to work on that so you could be more authentic and be more in relationship with people? Or are you still in process?
Yeah, because I kind of just started there because I had a stroke in May of last year.
Oh, wow. Sorry.
I began to think of death a lot more. That's probably why I sound funny, because the stroke affected my speech.
Oh, wow.
So then I started therapy, so just decided to talk about my adoption and stuff. I'm kind of just beginning to get it. That's really why I knew. So I guess I got to learn how to cope with it. And then I've been writing down, when this happens, I know I was triggered because of that. So I kind of, I guess you could say that, I'm starting to write down when I'm triggered and why. And then maybe learn from there how to cope with it.
Oh, that's a brilliant idea. The journaling is so good. I'm bad at it, but it's good.
I am too, but I did it in November, but I haven't been able to do it much. But, I write down things here and there and stuff. So,
would you be willing to give us an example of something that triggered you and that you analyzed through, something not too deep, but something to help us understand?
I went to my friend's house in Dayton last year, and I knew it was going to be me, her, and another girl that lives here. We've been friends since high school. And then her family members started to come over there, and then I started to get nervous and knew I felt like I didn't fit in because they were like family, and I adopted family is here, but I'm not close to them. So I feel like I don't know that family bond, love and all that. So I kind of sat there as long as I could. Then I began to just really get nervous and shaky and moving. So I was like, I'm going to go upstairs and lay down. So I, use that to get away and stuff.
Okay. So it brought you a lot of anxiety. You got physically couldn't sit still, so anxious that it really manifested physically, and you just removed yourself and went and laid down. Yeah. Yeah. It was at someone else's house, right? Yeah. So how did you eventually get out? You eventually came down, I suppose.
After everybody had left. So I played it off like I was sick and went to sleep.
Oh, okay.
And I heard her say that I was hiding because, she knows my hurts and stuff from being adopted. So I kind of just said, I was hiding, and then kind of explained that. It just makes me get that way when I'm around family, when I'm not really used to that.
Yeah. It sounds like your friend is compassionate and empathetic about it. And your therapist sounds like they are clued into adoption. Did you find a therapist that understands adoption trauma?
Yes.
Oh, that's good. Sometimes I've taken my son to therapists and they said, oh, he was adopted as a baby. He doesn't remember. It doesn't matter. I'm like, are you kidding me? These are psychiatrists telling me this. So I'm always happy when people find therapists or practitioners that understand it and are somewhat at least adoption attuned. It's so important. Oh man, I just really feel for you, Tammy. I can hear how much you want to connect and wish you could connect, and that you just feel really stuck. And I'm very proud of you for seeking out therapy. And I hope that it continues to help and that you can continue to grow. What, say the next 6 months to a year, what would be your dream for your life in the near future?
Well, I want to be an adoption therapist. So I was asking my therapist, she knew how you go about getting that adoption training. And then just for myself at home, I'm looking up the 7 core issues with adoption. Then I was going to look up all of those and because I wanted to write my book. It's called Two to forgive the birth mother and the adoptive mother. So.
Oh, 2 to forgive, like the number 2? 2 to forgive. Wow. So you have a memoir you're writing, or you're in the middle?
I want to. I haven't started it yet.
Okay.
But I have stuff written down in different notebooks.
Sure.
When I finally do get started.
Okay, so there's a memoir in you and you want to be a trauma-informed, adoption-attuned therapist. That's amazing. I'm sure that your insights would be really useful to other adopted people. That's really great. So what's the first step on your path?
Probably just find out where I can go or how do I go about getting the training.
Yeah.
Because I went to school because I was going for that to become a counselor, but I was going to go the adoption route, but there was no real classes for that as far as taking the classes. So I know I probably have to get outside training for that.
Yeah.
So I thought about going back to school and try and get a master's in psychology.
Oh, there you go.
So right now I just have the general studies and then a minor in psychology and a minor in creative writing. So.
Oh, wow. Very good. What advice do you have for adoptive parents? It sounds like your mom was really struggling, your adoptive mom, and kind of made some mistakes there that kind of really harmed you. What advice do you have for adoptive parents? Maybe they have a little kid that they just adopted. What would you tell them?
I think just be honest up front. As soon as they felt they were old enough to understand life and I guess things in life, just be honest up front that they are adopted and they know the information how and why instead of maybe somebody else telling them and they wasn't going to tell them, because I know they probably figure you're our child, but, someone else may tell them. So I think just be honest before someone else does.
It sounds like the lying and the deception and the back and forth was super traumatizing. And adoption is traumatizing, period. But if you add on those extra layers of lying and secrets and you actually asked and she told you, flat out lying, oh, gosh. What do you think was her issue? She was ashamed that she couldn't get pregnant, or do you know what her issue was about the adoption that she wouldn't just tell you?
I heard she'd had a miscarriage, so then she had a total hysterectomy. So I guess, from there she couldn't have kids and they were going to adopt another one, but then they didn't.
Okay.
And then also I just wanted to add from there, because of the lies, I felt like I lived in a house, not a home anymore. So it wasn't home to me when I would go to school and come home by 15. I hated to go home because I just felt like that wasn't where I was supposed to be.
Yeah. Did you end up going elsewhere as a teenager or you just were miserable? You came home, but you were miserable.
I moved out when I was like 22.
Okay. You're like, okay, I'm done. Wow. Gosh. Okay. I'm so sorry about all of that. And it's good for us to hear what that does to people. I'm glad you're sharing your story because it's important to hear that, our behavior as adoptive parents deeply affects our kids, and so important to be honest. And it sounds like maybe your mom never dealt with miscarriage and the loss of her ability to become pregnant. And that's a major grief for women. I struggle with that still. I was also infertile and never dealt with it. When it happened, I just jumped into adoption, which most people do. They're like, I got to get going because I've been trying to get pregnant and I couldn't. So let's do this other thing and we'll deal with that later. Well, it'd be better if we dealt with it sooner rather than later. But it's tough because it affects the next generation and affects everything about relationships and how you feel about yourself. And gosh, do you have any other advice for adoptees? Maybe somebody else that is struggling with dissociation or social anxiety, connecting. What would you tell them?
I would just say go to therapy or either order books, that deal in those subjects, all the issues that come with it. Do self-therapy and journal and write it down.
Yeah.
Learn emotional intelligence and your triggers and what triggers you and to learn ways to cope with it because it's never going to go away.
Yeah.
So I would just, need some kind of therapy to talk about it eventually.
I agree. Therapy for everyone all the time. I think everybody needs therapy. And yeah, it is something I've come to realize that with my son and my own journey too. Heck, it's not something that we're going to get to the finish line. Yeah. Well, I guess when we die, but it's not something that's going to be over. This is not something that's going to end. It's going to be something we'll deal with forever in different ways, kind of like the roller coaster. Sometimes it'll pop up more than others, but we'll just keep hacking away at it, right?
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Tammy, for sharing your important and powerful story. I wish you all the best with your memoir and your therapy work and your career goal to become a therapist. You sound very empathetic, and I think you'd be really good at it. So keep on it going.
Thank you.
Yeah. Listeners, make sure and share this episode with anyone you know. Maybe you know an adoptee who struggles with dissociation or social anxiety, or an adoptive parent that really needs to hear this to understand what goes on for adoptees that are trying to fit in, trying to belong, and just feeling disconnected. So very important for us to hear these voices. And I want to take this opportunity to let you know about a few upcoming events. So if you're listening to this in May of 2024, we have a medicine circle coming up for just adoptees on Sunday, May 26th with Miyok Ikaro, and it's for people who want to go deeper after experiencing sacred plant medicine or intensive therapy. We also have a webinar, particularly for adoptive parents. It's called Sexual and Reproductive Health for Adoptees. And it's for adoptive parents of kids and teens and young adults who want to help support them in their sexual health. And this is with a previous podcast guest as well, Ana Linda. She's a sex therapist and is an adoptee herself. So that event is on Wednesday, June 5th. So both of those events you can access easily through our website, unravelingadoption.com/events. Hope to see you there. Thank you all for listening. Tammy and I want you all to stay safe.